Hey everyone, my name's Mike Henry, and this is my Procreate 4.3 demo for the piece I call Be Like Lindsey. That's right, it's another corn dog piece. I will not stop, I refuse. Anyways, this was a piece that I wanted to do based off of some 90s fashion photography that I saw, and then when I was just kind of trying to come up with the pose, she ended up wielding a few corn dogs. So the way this starts, you'll actually see that it crops different in a minute. I started with my usual aspect ratio, which is like 8 by 12 or 4 by 6 or 2 by 3 or whatever. And then I end up expanding it a little bit just to fit the composition a little bit better. You can see at the beginning she was just gesturing, like here's just like a simple peace sign or something, and then I actually played a lot with the idea of her gesturing with a baseball cap, like she had taken it off and she was using it to sort of point at someone. And in the sketch phase, it just didn't work out. So we'll see that come up in a minute. One thing I also want to mention, these videos lately have been getting pretty long, and I don't know that having them be slowed at the same pace across the whole thing is always valuable. So for this one, we're going to try and find opportunities to speed it back up to a more normal speed or closer to the way the time lapse actually exports out, just so that we can kind of blow through some of the more repetitive parts. If you're new to my channel and this is your first video, I think that it's still going to be totally watchable as far as it going slow and you staying up to date with everything that's happening in the video. But if you would like to see things more slowly broken down, there's plenty of videos that you can go back and you can see those things. So you can see here, I already kind of know the outfit that I'm going to put her in, which I'm plugging that in right now, which is why her body didn't get a whole lot of definition. We wanted to make sure that the anatomy was there, because if that foundation is there, you know it's going to work when the clothes go on. But there wasn't a whole lot of detail, and that's because I knew this would happen. She's more of a mannequin in the sense that there were missing features, and some of the details of, like, let's say muscles or fat or skin or whatever didn't really have to go in yet. So we've got her outfit sort of blocked in. You can see I'm using these different colors. That's really more just so I can keep everything straight in my mind. And then right there, it just got switched to all black and then lowered in opacity. And now I'm going over it with another color again. And these are just methods by which I can separate things out visually. I kind of remind myself what I'm working on at a given time, and I can separate things. And they're also on different layers. That way I can toy with just anything from composition to posing to whatever. Even swapping out articles of clothing, swapping out facial features, things like that. So the level of fidelity that I'm going into here is really, it's a little further than I usually need, but I wanted to get a few things right. And that's why you see me sort of repeating. Like, some of this is like a redraw, and it might not necessarily have to be redrawn, but I am anyhow. I'm redrawing it anyhow. So we're gonna get it to where me as the artist feels more comfortable with the way that everything is going, so that I can move to the next stage and feel like I have enough information there to just start having fun with the paint process. Something I talk about a lot on my channel is how much of certain parts of your process are actually just based around your comfort, or even sometimes gaming your own brain, like trying to recognize shortcomings in yourself or your process or whatever it is, and then trying to get around that. And so when I was working on the face here, there were aspects of it that I didn't really like, and I was tweaking it and adjusting things. And sometimes it's either about the redraw because you're changing something, or it's more about just giving it more detail and more structure so that when you go to the next stage, it's there. There are other aspects of this that I don't need as much information. For instance, the hair. You can see she's got really big hair, and the shape of it, there's some detailing in with the way that the bangs come up from her forehead and like sort of become the bang, or come down from the side of her head and become the side chunk of hair. But then like the mass of it doesn't have that much detail. That's because, one, I knew that her hair was going to be dark black, so I knew that I wasn't going to have that much need to plug in a lot of detail. And also I knew that once I got to the paint phase, I'd be able to tweak things sort of on the fly and not have to rely on that structure. You can see I put those question marks next to the hat. I'm basically saying to myself, like, is this working? Is this an idea? Now, I will fully admit that some of it not working was just my own inability to grasp that angle. The ball cap reading in that angle was really weird, and the thumb positioning, I mean, right now the thumb is like complete trash. It just looks like this like sausage. Maybe that's where I got the idea for the corn dogs, but it was just bad. I thought that it was unclear. Maybe if it was part of an animation sequence, I'd be able to sell it a little bit more, because you would see what the hat was before she gestured with it. I mean, really, these are all kind of just excuses. Ultimately, I stuck corn dogs in her hand, or a corn dog in her hand. Boom, right there. You can see me making a little face. I totally forgot that I did that. But anyways, and that's because I love corn dogs, and they're an excellent thing to gesture with. If you're ever finding that you're trying to make a point and it's not really getting through, stick a corn dog in your hand. Try gesturing with it. It's an old business trick. I think that's how Bill Gates sold computers. Is that what he does? Anyways, so then here we've got trying to tell a little bit more of a story instead of her just having some random corn dog. Her other hand is holding a tray of corn dogs. The reason why this piece is called Be Like Lindsey is because the full thing is they were almost out of corn dogs. Lindsey bought the last 4. Be more like Lindsey. Be like Lindsey. And that's where that came from. If you go back to like my Instagram post of it, it doesn't really explain it, but at least it's somewhat in context. So now you can see with all these rando things that are happening, as far as like, gotta plug in this hand, gotta plug in that tray, gotta get the ketchup and the mustard on the corn dogs, and the corn dogs are laying there in the tray, and then gotta get the hand. Like, we've got a lot of colors here because these are all new additions, and I just want to make sure that it's all reading very clearly to me. By the way, I get a lot of people mentioning that Lindsey may be smart because she got the corn dogs, but she doesn't know what's supposed to go on them because there's both ketchup and mustard. I know there are hardcore mustard folks out there. I also know that there are probably less hardcore ketchup folks that are more just like, I don't know, man, I put ketchup on it. To be honest, I'm a barbecue guy. I actually think that if you take like some Sweet Baby Ray's, preferably the spicy Sweet Baby Ray's, and you dunk a corn dog in that, that's the best way to go with corn dogs. I will fight anyone, well, I'll argue with anyone who says differently. I'm expecting lots of comments. Actually, let's do that. A lot of YouTubers do that bullshit, right? Hey guys, tell me in the comments what you dip a corn dog in. And so I guess do that. Tell me what you dip your corn dog in. I gotta say, here in Spain, I found a place that does actually pretty damn good corn dogs. They're not like stellar write letters home level of corn dog, but they are good. They will do. So now we're starting to lay in the flats. This is probably going to be a stage at which we're going to speed the video back up. So I'm going to experiment with that. I'm going to stop recording for a second. I'm going to speed up the footage and then start recording again. And we'll see if I can actually mention all the things I want to mention at the speed that it'll run at. All right, I just checked it. This is gonna go kind of fast, so let's see how it goes. So we've got the neck, as you can see, laying in there. The neck and her back ear are on the same layer. Her face is on another layer that's on top of that. This hand and wrist and arm is gonna be on the same layer as the neck. You can also see the evidence because her shirt will go over that. That's why the skin just sort of goes straight through. It sort of overdraws or overpaints into the shirt. Now we've got her eyes almost done. At least done for this stage, because the eyes really come to life during the lighting phase more than anything. What's next? I think we jump into the hair. So we're going to do the eyebrows. Since her hair is already so dark, I usually do my eyebrows darker than the hair, just to bring extra expression to the face. It's a similar reason why someone might put makeup in their eyebrows or around their eyes, just trying to draw attention to the face, or accentuate emotions in the face, I guess. And then because that eyebrow is already so dark though, because the hair is also going to be dark, we just use that same color and bring it into the hair. Since the hair is black, the eyelashes are black, and the eyebrows are black. Although the reality is that they're not actually all black. They're all slightly different colors, and whether or not that comes through in the end result, I don't know, but it's really just trying to get some variation in there and try to make it somewhat realistic to how somebody who has this hair color and then also wears makeup would potentially colorize all of those aspects. The hair is all behind the head. That's why you saw the hair cut out in the actual skin layers for the face. The wardrobe in here was based off of a fashion photo that I found online. So we're going to basically, it's not 100%, but it's really similar. So right now I'm just sort of basing the volumes off of a little bit what's in the photo, but mostly her body and the type of fabric, and just trying to make sure that all plays. Some of the patterning is also directly inspired, but then is different than the actual photo. So we're going to use that shirt, the shirt's white, as its base flat. The jeans are all just jeans, so that gets basically one core flat. And now you can see the black going into the shirt. So now that we've got that white shirt laid out as our core shape, we can now use that as a selection and then fill in everything else. So you can see I went outside of the sleeves there. That was actually just a mistake that I went outside of it, and then I cleared it and continued to work within it. So now we'll get the purple put in, and the yellow, and the pinkish red. You can see there that the purple went in a little darker, and then I lightened it. I would say most of this had the right values put in with the flats from the beginning, but then some things did get slightly adjusted as time went on. Putting in the earrings. I put the eye glints in sometimes just as a thing to sort of remind myself, like, hey, this will turn out eventually. Sometimes I feel like the pieces don't really turn out until all those extra layers start getting thrown in. So sometimes I do that just because it's like satisfying to put that glint in there. We've got the corn dog and then the other corn dogs. All those corn dogs are put in as separate layers for now because it'll be easier when I start doing the ambient occlusion pass. I put ketchup and mustard on so people don't get pissed, although people still did. Corn dog enthusiast, like anybody's a bigger corn dog enthusiast than me. I would like to meet that person. But anyways, we get the fingers put in and the palm, the sort of main chunk of the hand and the wrist, and then we put the shirt, and this part of the shirt is behind everything else. So I want to slow it down again here because we're going to start talking about the graphic design. The graphic design for this background is not directly referencing something, but is certainly inspired by the 90s. I googled some 90s graphic design and saw a couple of cool elements that I was like, okay, I gotta make sure that I have those, and so I did that. These are just triangles drawn, not even with the triangle tool, just straight lines, although that one was, I believe, that one that just popped in there. I think the bigger one, though, was... I don't know. I'm just lying at this point. I don't really actually remember how they were done. It's either with the triangle tool or not, sort of an irrelevant point. And then I've lowered the opacity of them just so that they would start giving some of that overlapping happening. They are not overlapped with any type of layer effect, although I believe I toy with that occasionally. They were just done and then lowered in opacity. This grid was a design element that I saw in a lot of 90s stuff, so I just quickly created the grid and then moved it around to where I thought worked with the piece. Also had lowered opacity. We get the teeth put in, and then we'll do the lips. Now, the lips, it kind of depends. I count that as like local color, similar to blush or darkening around the eyes or something like that. But sometimes the lips can be so structural that it's important to have them in at this stage. The reason why I'm mentioning it in this way is that if you've watched previous videos, what I'll do with the facial features, especially because the face is skin usually and skin has variation, is I won't put that variation in until I've started defining the surface with like ambient occlusion. Sometimes I'll go as far as to getting some of the direct light in before I'll do that. But with lips, I just find them to be such a key aspect, especially on a female character, or at least when they're prominent on a female character. And I want to get those in because it's going to be part of the painting process, part of me defining those shapes of the face. What you're seeing with the background being sort of pink like that is because the yellowish white that I want the background to be was too similar to the white carton that the corn dogs are in. So I just had to color it something. So I believe what the background fill is right now is actually what my shadow color is. You see the ambient occlusion starting to get pounded in the background there. That is just that color set to multiply. You can adjust the opacity depending on what you need. However, I just went with it at 100% because the color was already something that I knew I could rely on. And so we're painting in the ambient occlusion. This time I'm not gonna say what AO is. You can go to previous videos or Google it. Sorry if you're new, I'm just not gonna repeat it in this video. We always try to find different things to talk about, whether it's functional or philosophical, but for this time I'm just not going to explain it. So we're moving through the layers as we always do from the bottom up, using the next layer to clear the shadow for the previous layer. The shadow is done with a core layer that's on top of everything else. It's not shadow layers in between all of the flat layers. It's one that's on top, and that's a method that I use in Photoshop, I use it in Photoshop, but I use it specifically in Procreate to keep my layer count down. I do Procreate pieces where I will individually color pick and I'll render up every little individual thing and choose all those colors, although I haven't been doing that for like the last year or so because this is just way more efficient in Procreate. Something that I think I've talked about in the past, but I recently was doing some art at work and I got to color in Photoshop, which is just something I hadn't done in a while. And Photoshop is much better at this because there's no layer limits, and you can also set folders to layer property, like layer effects, blend modes and stuff. So what I do when I'm doing it that way is I actually have layers that are just normal, and then they are my shadow layers, and they are in a folder that's set to multiply. That way I can do a lot of editing of the individual layers, and I can make new layers, and I don't have to worry about multiply layers that are sort of multiplying on top of each other. Since it's all in that one multiply folder, it acts as if it's one unified layer, which is super dope. And it gives you a lot more control. You don't really have that in Procreate. So instead, what you'll see me do occasionally, I don't think I do it in this piece, but in future videos, I'll talk about when I do it because I know I just recently did it in something, is I will have a multiply layer, I'll paint on it, and then I'll say, actually, this next part is going to be kind of risky, or I have to blend it a certain way, and I don't want to interrupt the other layer that I'm already working on. So what I'll do is I'll create a new layer, set it to multiply, I'll do whatever I'm trying to do painty wise with that, and then I take both of those layers and convert them back to normal, and then merge them and convert them back to multiply. The reason I do that is because Procreate seems to actually remember what those two layers look like when they interact. So if you have two layers that are multiply and they overlap in some way, and then you merge them while they're multiplied, it'll create a new value where it overlapped so that it maintains the look. So it's not maintaining the actual correct color that you were originally painting with. It actually figures out what that color should be through the multiply, which in some ways is actually awesome. And there are times where you're absolutely going to want that, especially when you're trying to merge a bunch of layers together and you want to keep the look to be accurate. But when you try to have this like one unified shadow layer and you don't want that overlap happening, it can be a giant pain in the ass, basically. So now you're probably wondering, why is the background dark brown? The reason is because her hair is so dark that if I'm trying to paint the shadows into it and the exterior is very bright, it'll bleed in a way. It'll make it so that your eyes can't very easily see the changes that you're making. And when you're dealing with these values that are actually really close to each other, you just want to be able to see what you're doing. An alternate way for me to have done this would have also been to just make her hair like white or something bright so that I can see everything that I'm doing. And then when it converts back to this very dark gray brown, it will be fine because you know that it was fine when it was super visible. So of course it's going to be fine when it's really dark. But I also wanted to save myself some work, so I didn't want to have to go into sort of like white hair and make sure that that was absolutely perfect What you just saw there, actually, if you go back a second ago, what you just saw was the layers turn back to normal for a second. That was me doing exactly what I said before, where I have a second layer and I'm working in multiply, and then I need to merge them, so I convert them back to normal for the merge. Anyways, so in order to save myself some work, because I know some of this information won't be visual, some of this visual information won't be visible, I'm making sure that I am still working on the darker color so that I can see exactly what the viewer is going to see to some degree, and I can save myself some effort in there. Instead of being super clinical about all of my details, it can be a little messier, and sometimes it's about finding the shortcuts and getting there quicker. Now, something that you're not seeing yet in the image is skin variations. I haven't put that in yet because I still haven't defined all those shapes. Also, you'll notice that her backhand has her fingernail polish on, but her other hand doesn't, and that's because, again, I haven't really defined those shapes. Since I'm working with a shadow layer that's on top, I can eventually, when I get to that hand and I'm defining all of it, I can say, okay, this is where the fingernail is. I can put the shadows in. I can pretend that there's a fingernail, basically that there's like a skin-colored fingernail, and then later I can go in with paint and I can paint it in. I could even just kind of imply where the fingernail is going to be, and then when I go in and paint in the fingernail, I can use that as my selection and really finish it off and make it high quality. So I'm going to let the video stay slow for a bit while we watch the definition get put in for the hand, and then we'll keep it slow for the definition put into the face, and then we'll let it speed up again for a bit. At this point, I'm taking the rough sketch that I did and I'm trying to find what I want that hand to actually look like. Some of what you do here, if you're not color picking and you're not color picking like the bright part and then the dark part, and that's the way somebody who works on like one layer might work, where they have where they're sort of, oh, I need a highlight here, so they literally just put it in. Oh, I need more shadow here, so they literally just put it in. Here you have to be a little predictive. You have to say, okay, well, I'm going to put in this shadow, and I'm going to rely on the fact that I know I'm going to put that shadow in correctly, and that whatever highlights I need will be taken care of when I get to the highlight phase. That's a little hard for some, and it's just kind of in some ways the way that I've always worked, so it's what I'm more used to. But I will absolutely admit that there's sometimes that like valley of despair that you go into when you're creating art, where you're like in the middle of it and you're just like, this isn't going anywhere. I think that different people, based on their process, have different valleys of despair, and I think that mine sometimes is where I'm plugging these layers in, and I'm like, let's say on probably not at the flats stage, but definitely when I'm in like this stage where I'm thinking to myself, like, I don't know if this is going to work. Like, I don't know if I've got this shadow in this way and I put the next shadow in, is that really going to be enough? If I put in the highlights, is that really going to be enough? Whereas maybe somebody who works on one layer will have something that's really messy and they still have to tighten the whole thing up, and they're like, oh, do I still have to tighten this up? Or someone who's working on lots of different layers is saying, oh, I've completely rendered the skin, but I haven't even gotten to the eyes yet. Is that going to come together? So I think I'm just saying that different people, depending on their technique or their process, they've got different stages in which they have those extreme doubts, and it's really just about trying to be honest with yourself and identify when you might have those doubts, and then try to figure out, okay, I know how to do art. Every piece is challenging in different ways. What do I need to get through this? What do I need to give myself confidence that I can wrap this thing up in a way that I'm proud of it? So now we're on the face. This is one of the most fun stages for me, is doing the face definition parts. So you can see on the eye, I just kind of blotted in some paint, and then I went in and smudged it into the way that I wanted it to be, and used the eraser to sort of also pull away in areas. And that's sort of how I go in and give that definition. You're trying to find the right softs and hards to try and communicate what that surface is. If something sort of falls off in a big round shape, then you want that to have a soft fall off. If something is much more structured, it's going to have more cuts in it. And I think that's something amateurs sort of mess up quite often, is either everything's too soft or everything's too hard, or maybe there is soft and hard, but you don't know exactly where that's should be, and I think that's totally fair. I think that's the hardest part, and so just trying to find that is a really good idea, or that's a really good thing to focus on. The idea is focus on that, I should say. Okay, we're softening the shading around the eyeball, and then we're going to go from the eyeball to the iris, and on a lot of these I don't do the pupil as like a separate flat. Lately what I've been doing is I've just been saving it for the color stage. The shading stage like we're in right now. It's interesting because it just gets you a slightly different effect. It gives you sort of like a softer pupil. You can always go in later with another shadow layer and make it darker, but there's just things about it that I've been enjoying lately, so I've been going about it that way. You could also see that her irises I darkened and saturated so that I could just make them a little more punchy. It gives her this sort of darker look in the eye, this deeper look, and I think that that's just really nice. It kind of makes her a little on the endearing side, instead of having like maybe a cold stare, because we're not looking for that out of this character in this one. So we've sped it up now. You can see that we've got skin variation now in the face, in the palms of her hands, around her eyes. We're going to also be doing the ambient occlusion pass on her jeans. We will bring a little bit of variation into the jeans eventually, but we'll try to highlight that in some way. And we're just trying to finish the AO pass, and then since we've got the structure in certain aspects, or certain parts of her, we're going to bring in some extra detail there. After we do the pants, I believe it moves on to the shirt and then the purse, and we have to finish off the purse because as you can see there's nothing connecting the straps to the purse, and then we'll get it wrapped up for this phase. Okay, now we're doing the direct shadow from the direct light. You can see it being cast from the corn dogs onto themselves, and then as the illustration continues, we're going to have like her casting a shadow onto all of that as well. This is done with the same color as the AO pass. It's just that since it's not getting smudged, its opacity isn't being reduced in the actual application, so it just comes on heavier and harder, which this, again, you can adjust the opacity to make it a little lighter, or you can just straight up color shift the layer itself to be darker or whatever you want, more saturated. In fact, the final version of this, the shadow gets a little more saturated, which is something I've been kind of shying away from, but it really worked for this piece, so it was something that I was okay with. So this is the stage where we enforce the direction of the lighting, or I should say we don't reinforce it, we're actually introducing it, but I'm using it in the back of my mind to constantly say like the light's coming from here, the light's coming from here, so the shadow's casting here. I'm just trying to drive that home for myself. Let's go ahead and speed this up. There are technically, I guess, things that I could mention, but really the important part is these are the cast shadows that sort of shows where the light's coming from and how it's hitting, and I'm going through in the same way that I did with the ambient occlusion pass, going from layer to layer and using the next layer to clear the last one, so that I can try to, as a second shadow layer, have this hard cast happening. we've gone quicker through this than we have been in the last bunch of videos. It's now, this shadow is basically done. You're going to see a couple of graphical elements change in the background here and the creation of the cast shadow. This here, you see these little squigglies. It was just something I saw in graphic design from that era, and I wanted to try it out. I ended up not liking it, so I kill it. And then that shadow that's cast onto the background, that was just done by duplicating all of her flats and filling it into the color of the shadow that I want, putting it behind her, setting it to multiply, and offsetting it a little bit. There will be a revisit to that shadow. It's more just to stick it in there so that I can start seeing how it's going to look. So there's some little tweaky shit that's happening across the image right now, but in a second we're going to go into the highlights. This is where we bring some really interesting play, both in the skin and the hair, and then we can find some, I mean, the jeans get a little bit of a punch from this. The shirt does as well, but it's really mostly the skin and the hair. Right now we're going to go in with like a blue, like a light teal, and then paint it in with a much lowered opacity, and then we'll come back in again and we'll put a sharper one right there, just to try and have this sort of stylized shine happening across her hair. On the layer that has the softer color, that's what we're going to be using for the highlight on her skin, which should be coming in a second. I honestly can't remember if I did it as a separate layer or if it's the same layer, but it's more or less the same idea, which is that it is a lowered opacity blue. You can see it there on the ear, now it's on the eye. I'm not doing this in a way where I'm going through the layers like I normally do, since there's far less happening with the light, because it's not like a high key image. I just sort of go through and put it where I want to have it. I don't actually go through all the layers because it's just not going to happen. I will at the end of this though use my hard shadow layer to select and clear from this light so that I can really make sure that the light isn't getting into the shadows. There will be a time where we do a bounce pass. It just won't be done with the main light that's shining on her. It will be done with the reflected light from parts of her to other parts of her. Oh, I also throw in this extra shadow layer, something I normally don't do, just to really push the depth there because I felt like it definitely wasn't reading, and I didn't necessarily want like a very hard shadow in there, so I did that to try and create some sort of depth there. Now I'm on to the jeans. You can see some of the light getting put into the jeans. Next it'll go into the shirt. It's also already on the purse and stuff. There'll be a couple little tweaks here, but the important next step is her right hand is a little bit of a monstery hand. I kind of threw it in there a little quick, rushed it, need to revisit it. So what we do here, since those fingers were on their own layers anyways, is we adjust all of those fingers, get them much smaller, a little bit more feminine. Not that they have to be, I just feel like it fits her character better. And we sculpt them also a little bit better. You can see I've turned off all my layers now that were shadowy layers. Now I've turned them on and started turning them off individually because I got to go back in and rework these fingers and the hand, taking into account its new shape and size. So we have to re-AO, redirect shadow, and then re-highlight, and also redo the fingernails because the fingernails are now a different size and in different places. You can see right there I just repositioned them all. And then lastly, we will eventually address the cast shadow because that cast shadow has to come down a little bit too. We don't want it to be one of those situations where she's like, you know, Dr. Jekyll, but then her shadow is Mr. Hyde, or she's Bruce Wayne and Batman is the shadow. I don't think we're in that territory, but you know. So getting the AO done, and then yep, here we go. We've now turned on the direct shadows. We're reapplying that. And then we're also going to reapply skin variations in her hand. And we're going to actually readdress that in general. So when we're done with this hand, we're going to pull out and see sort of the broader changes that happen here. So I've sped it up just a little bit here so we can plow through this. There's the skin variation brought back in. And in a second, we will zoom out. Okay, and so now we're gonna see a few skin adjustments across the board. And now we're going to put that little dark part under the nose so that we can really push the dimension of the nose. And now, unfortunately, we've entered the like sort of super tweaky phase. You're gonna see tons of shit happening across here, and I wanted to try and cut this so that I could like zoom in on this or zoom in on that, but there's really a lot happening, and I'll just talk about it broadly. In order to push some of the depth and turn the form, we've got a darkening happening on the left side of her body. You can see it most prominently in her jeans and her shirt. We also add a little bit of darkening on the face to try and get some more dimension on the sides of the face. We got a bunch of highlights and bounce lights getting thrown in, or bounces I should say, getting thrown in everywhere. Little details like the little shine on the corn dog that sometimes happens. Here we've got a little bit of a purple edging happening on the shadow that goes around her. There's a subtle texture on the background. It's just like a watercolor texture that's like super low opacity, but it just gives a little bit more back there. And at this point we are turning off layers because I'm trying to tweak something in there and I need those layers off in order to see it. I honestly can't tell you what it was, but nostrils got a little bit darkened so we could punch the face a little bit more. Some vignetting is happening. That's what you're seeing flicker on and off there on her body so much, is trying to darken parts of her and lighten other parts of her. We're also just playing in general with like readability and where we're drawing the attention of the eye, and colors. We've got like some gradient action happening in the background, and then at the very end we'll actually throw some color balance tweaks into the whole thing. So I'm sorry that that goes by so fast. It's just kind of the nature of it. If I were to record every step of the painting, that was probably about 30 minutes of like additional tweaks and everything. And we're gonna do the last bit of them right now with some depth stuff, some color stuff. You're gonna see, like I said, some flickering happening, some extra bouncing happening, and there you go, see that little bit of a pink kind of overlay. And now here is the final piece. A bunch of little tweaks got put in, even like mentioning the little patterning on the carton that has the corn dogs. If you've ever been to like a fair or whatever, you've seen something similar to that. It's kind of nice how that also keys into the grid that's in the background as part of the 90s design aesthetic. The background also is trying to reference a little bit of what's happening in her shirt. So that's, I mean, it's kind of messy there at the end. We sort of crash landed, but as far as trying to explain all the details, but I just hope that it looks cool and that some of this explanation helped with understanding it. Now let's look at some of the basically the major stages of this piece. First, here we've got the sketch, so you can see where everything started from and the rough planning. And then we've got the flats phase, although this has the color variations in there, which obviously didn't come until later. Then we have the ambient occlusion pass, although it's not entirely complete. You can see on the purse and stuff. And then we've got the shadows, the cast shadows. This is me trying to sort of, through archaeology, pull out the different stages. And then with everything flipped on at the end with all of those little tweaks and everything. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoy all the videos. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, please consider liking and subscribing. All of that support actually matters, even though sometimes it doesn't seem like it. So thanks for all of that support. And I'll see you on the next one. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are all the places where you can find me.